Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into a comprehensive review of the factors affecting photosynthesis, and we're going to wrap up our entire unit. In this explainer, we're bringing together everything we've learned about how plants capture energy, and we'll look really closely at the specific environmental conditions that actually control this incredibly vital process.
Here's our game plan for today's review. We'll move sequentially from the basic equation through limiting factors and graphs, compare all of that with cellular respiration, and finally tie it all together with a unit summary. Let's get to it.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, a quick refresher on the absolute basics of photosynthesis.
So, just to make sure we're all on the exact same page, photosynthesis is the process where plants convert light energy into chemical energy, specifically glucose. You remember the equation, right? 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus light energy yields C6H12O6, or glucose, and 6O2. And keep in mind, this whole amazing process happens in two distinct stages, the light-dependent reactions and the Calvin cycle.
Moving right along to Section 2, let's talk about what actually holds this process back out in nature. You see, photosynthesis doesn't just run at a constant maximum speed all the time. The rate depends heavily on four key environmental variables: light intensity, carbon dioxide concentration, temperature, and water availability. In biology, we refer to these as limiting factors. Now, what exactly is a limiting factor? Well, it's simply the one specific factor that slows down or limits the overall rate of a process. Think of it like a bottleneck. The key concept here is that even if every other condition is absolutely perfect, photosynthesis just cannot speed up if one essential piece, like too little light or a lack of water, is in short supply. Let's look at light intensity first. Light is literally the energy source here. As light gets more intense, the rate of photosynthesis shoots right up along with it. But eventually it just levels off. Why? Because the plant hits a ceiling where some other factor becomes that bottleneck. But without enough light to begin with, the plant simply cannot photosynthesize efficiently. Then we have carbon dioxide. Since CO2 is one of our primary reactants, it behaves a lot like light. Add more CO2 and the rate climbs up until it hits a maximum plateau. If carbon dioxide levels drop too low, glucose production is absolutely going to slow down.
Temperature is a really fascinating one because this whole process is driven by enzymes, and enzymes are incredibly picky. They function best within a very specific optimal temperature range. If it gets too cold, enzyme activity totally slows down. But if it gets too hot, that can actually damage or denature those enzymes. Plus, really high temperatures cause the plant to lose a ton of water.
Speaking of water, a lack of it triggers quite the chain reaction. Water is a reactant, right? So without enough of it, the plant goes into defense mode and closes its stomata. But when those stomata close, less carbon dioxide can enter the leaf. No CO2 means photosynthesis slows way down. So extended water shortages will seriously reduce plant growth.
Okay, Section 3. Let's look at how scientists actually visualize these limiting factors on a graph.
When scientists measure the rate of photosynthesis, usually by tracking oxygen production, carbon dioxide uptake, or glucose production, they use graphs to pinpoint exactly what is limiting the plant. It's pretty straightforward. An upward slope means the rate is increasing. But the second you see a flat line, that plateau tells you another factor has become limiting, and the plant has hit its absolute maximum rate for those specific conditions.
It is so crucial to grasp exactly why that leveling off happens. Just endlessly cranking up one factor won't help if another one is dragging behind. For instance, you could blast a plant with all the light in the world, but if it has very little carbon dioxide, it's not going to matter. The essential rule to remember is that the slowest factor always determines the overall rate. It's a total team effort.
Let's pivot to Section 4. We need to zoom out and see how photosynthesis connects to the broader biological picture.
These two are the ultimate biological power couple. They are perfectly complementary processes. Photosynthesis stores energy by locking it up inside glucose, while cellular respiration breaks that glucose down to release the energy and produce ATP. Together, they cycle matter and energy continuously through all living organisms.
If we put them side by side, the contrast is pretty striking. Photosynthesis stores energy, happens in the chloroplasts, requires light, uses carbon dioxide and produces glucose and oxygen. On the flip side, cellular respiration releases energy, takes place over in the mitochondria, doesn't require light at all, uses oxygen, and breaks down glucose to produce carbon dioxide.
Looking at their chemical equations side by side reveals something really cool. Matter is constantly being recycled. The products of one process literally become the raw reactants for the other. Plants turn CO2 and water into glucose and oxygen, and then cellular respiration turns that same glucose and oxygen right back into CO2, water, and ATP. It's an endless loop. But here's the catch. While matter cycles in a loop, energy absolutely does not. Energy flows in a strictly one-way street through ecosystems. It enters as sunlight, plants lock it into chemical energy, consumers obtain it by eating plants or other organisms, and eventually it's released as ATP during respiration. One direction only.
All right, Section 5. Let's bring all these distinct concepts together for our big unit summary.
Let's trace this entire flow step by step one last time. Sunlight hits the chlorophyll, sparking the light-dependent reactions. Those reactions crank out ATP and NADPH. The plant then hands those off to the Calvin cycle to build glucose. And finally, that glucose is used in cellular respiration to generate ATP for the cell. Boom! From sun to cell. So, as we wrap up this unit, here are the major takeaways you need to lock in. Plants capture light energy through photosynthesis. The light-dependent reactions produce ATP and NADPH, while the Calvin cycle uses that ATP and NADPH to build sugars. Also, don't forget that environmental conditions dictate the speed of all this, which is exactly why plants have evolved such incredible adaptations to reduce water loss and photorespiration. The bottom line? Photosynthesis converts light energy into chemical energy that supports almost all life.
Now, for your exam, make absolutely sure you have these key vocabulary terms down cold. You must be comfortable defining photosynthesis, chloroplast, chlorophyll, thylakoid, stroma, ATP, NADPH, the Kelvin cycle, our C3, C4, and CAM pathways, transpiration, and photorespiration. Fluency with these terms is non-negotiable for describing how everything we've covered actually works.
To anchor everything, just remember the big picture. Plants are energy capturers. Photosynthesis is the ultimate energy storage mechanism, packing it into glucose, while respiration is the great releaser. Because of this delicate balance, photosynthesis supports basically every ecosystem on Earth, driving the amazing diversity of plant adaptations we see all around us today.
When you really think about it, looking back at everything we've learned, photosynthesis is undeniably one of the most critical biological processes in existence. It produces the oxygen we breathe, provides the food that sustains entire food webs, and it literally captures the sun's energy and glucose to keep this planet alive. Next time you walk past this simple green leaf, remember you aren't just looking at a plant. You're looking at a microscopic powerhouse that makes life on Earth possible. Because without this exact chemical process, where would any of us actually be?